Today we will be discussing exactly what does a business architect do. Over to you, Maarten.
Thanks, Melanie. So pretty much it's a difficult thing to explain in a really simple way because I think we mentioned it a lot of times before. The first thing is for me is to put myself in the shoes of the person sitting on the other side of the table. I need to become the business manager or the operations manager or the marketing manager and understand what kind of challenges they have. And most of the time, I mean, I don't understand their problems as deep as they do. And it's actually the reason why I love what I do is the fact that it's an adventure you go on. You go on an adventure of a discovery every time when you meet a new person. I don't know, I don't like routine things. So, I love the fact that it's somebody new, it's a new industry, it's a new kind of challenge. And every person, I mean, because you're dealing with these challenges every day, most of these business owners already has an idea or some kind of an idea or possible ideas how they can approach solving the problems. So a good starting point, as we mentioned before also, is just start with a brainstorming document. So pretty much, I'm going to just quickly walk you through some of the documentation, the documents that we use during the specification phase. There's also called needs analysis or user story. That's also a term that's used in Agile. So we like to start using Jamboard and just to brainstorm some ideas. So pretty much you'll go and just draw diagrams and brainstorm some ideas. So the next thing that we do is while we're talking through things, we'll start to work on the specification documents. Now, there are a few specification documents that are involved. The one is called a wireframe. So a wireframe is basically a visual mock-up of the user interface. So what we do is we use this little program called Balsamic, and what it allows us to do is to design a mock-up of the user interface before we do any development work. So this is a very early stage draft, so there's not a lot happening here yet. But what happens is when you open the page, you can see that you can actually click on these things as if it's, you can open pages. So this is, for example, we see all the users in the system. And if you want to add a new user in the system, so you can actually play with the system as if it's a real system before we develop anything. This is great for, because things can be very theoretical. At the end of the day, you can go and show this to the people in your business who will be using the system and say, listen here, do you think this will work for you? Because everybody can understand a visual user interface, but not everybody necessarily understands very technical specs.
Exactly.
And then, yes, and then sort of a mirror image. The mirror image of what we're doing over here in technical terms is we need to design what the database is going to look like. So we call this software requirements spec. Now this is where we go in the mind map, and just to show you. Once again, this is for an estate agent. He actually was kind enough to give me permission to share, some of this very, very early draft specs with you. But in this system, you can see every one of these little blocks is a table in the database. So you can see this database has got to do with, the recording of deals, who were the purchasers and sellers, in the system, who was the estate agents, the persons in the marketing channels that we use to line up a deal. So this is on a very high level, and it looks quite simple. I mean, it's just it's under 10 tables, so it looks very simple. But then when you start to go into the detail, that is okay. So when you record a deal, what do you? And this is still the early stage draft, so it doesn't have all the details going to go in yet. But now you need to think this is where the devil's in the detail.
Yes.
And we start connecting things. So, for example, you can see we had a seller here, and then we decided no, but there can actually be multiple sellers. So because when you sell a property, there could be multiple owners. So that's where we basically split it into a separate table. So we say you can have 1 sellers or you can have 20 sellers. Theoretically, I mean, in practice, it's usually 2 sellers. But anyway, and then every seller must be connected to a person, and a person is a common thing. All people have the same properties. Now, yes. This is something that's very important when you're designing a database, that you never want to replicate information because that's a poor design. So you have to dig into a lot of detail and think about multiple ways of structuring this so it's done in a correct, best practice, effective way. And the only real way to do this is to get started, you know, and see where this adventure of discovery is basically taking you.
Maarten, I also see that you use different colors in your diagrams.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Yes, that's a good question. Pretty much because this is, while you're working on the document, you know, you don't always have all the answers.
Yeah.
Not everything's going to be done in the beginning. So we, for example, might be touching on something and we want to at least make reservation for the future. So we'll have future items, for example, in yellow. So sometimes in a database design, you always think a little bit ahead. So we do use Agile, where we build things in small iterations. But, you know, when we're doing the specs work, we try and think, for example, 6 months into the future, if you're going to be doing, you know, 3 months of development work, or, you know, one year into the future when we're doing 3 months. It all depends on the scope and how much, you know, it depends on the complexity of the project, how far into the future you have to look. So some things you want to at least make provision for it. It's like building a 2-story home, and you want to make sure your foundation is strong enough to carry the second story when you're eventually going to get to building it.
Yes.
Then there are also some items that, you know, to-do items that we're not going to get around to immediately. There's also, you know, external references. This is where, for example, we had the instance where a deal is connected to a property. So this means that this is referencing another table. So we draw this little arrow to the properties table, so you can get a very good idea, you know, what is connected to what by just looking at the arrows.
Hence all the colors.
Hence all the colors. So all the light blue stuff basically tells you, listen here, just take note, this is linked to something in another table.
Great stuff. Next up is the process diagram.
Yes, this is actually something that we use a lot. So we're busy brainstorming very high level in our basically our Jam board over here. And then the other thing that we'll do is we'll basically have this diagram. So the Jam board is just for playing around with concepts and ideas. And then, okay, when we sort of think, all right, this is the way we should do it, or when we're mapping the current processes, we've got a lot of old video about our diagrams.net. Now it's a great way of basically mapping processes and whatever. So what you can then basically do is you can map out your business process over here. So this is more, once we finish through the high level brainstorming of just, you know, scribbling through ideas, we basically make it more formal in this business diagram, which then sort of, this is on a high level what the process flow looks like, which will then result in a wireframe that looks like this and a database design that looks like this. So those three sort of goes hand in hand while we're doing the specs.
So what's next, Maarten?
Okay, so I did mention in our SRS document, we had that little red color for to do things, but we're actually moving away from doing that, because the problem is if you have to do notes in your database design and you have to do notes in your user interface, and you know your user interface is 50 pages. If you want to see everything you still need to do, you need to go through all the 50 pages, and that's a waste of time. So you start to lose track of what you still need to do and figure out. So we started moving to this, basically the concept of using a Google Sheet for keeping track of all our to-do list items. So this works very well for us, because we basically, as I'm talking to the client, I'll just think, oh, all right, we need to figure out something. So I'll make a note of it. And then we say, we requested in what date. So we can just, you know, and then we can assign it to someone. So in my business, although I sit and do the brainstorming and the high level figuring out what we're going to do and how we're going to approach it, I allocate a lot of this to developers to help me, you know, to do some of the wireframes and whatever. And in the future, we want to have multiple business architects. In Tech Genius, I'm also trying to automate my own business, and I'm trying to fire myself. And this is one of the ways. Also, it means that if something should happen to me, everybody can see exactly what my thought process is, all the things that we still need to figure out in the process, in the project still. So this is part of me firing myself.
Great stuff. And I see next on in the line is URM. What exactly is URM?
Okay, so URM is basically a user rights matrix. So once we figure out the user interface and the database design, one of the things when you create a new user in the system, you can assign a role to a specific user. This is towards the end of the project. We really try to think, who are all the role players and what can they do in the system? So what we'll basically do is, if I can just show an example of one we did.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are all the roles that you can assign to somebody. So each one of those is a column. And then we go, so these are all the columns, all the possible roles you have. And then you have all the actions that can be performed in the system, and then you put a little X's in who can actually do it. So for example, manage activities, this is just a random project, but the person who could do it is active members and nobody else. So this, you can see that we're very thorough, and it forces you to think who can do this and who cannot do this. And this is also something that's used by the testers, because the tester not only checks that this user can do it, but they must also check that these users can't do it, which is just as important.
Exactly.
Yes, so this just helps the client a lot to go through the thought process with us. And then besides just saying who can do what in the system, we also basically have our action log. This is where we keep an audit trail. So for all these items, we also go through the thought process of thinking, okay, well, which of these items are so important that they must be logged in an audit trail. Now, you don't want to put everything in an audit trail, because that's going to inflate your database and make your system slow, and just creates a lot of clutter in your system. So it helps to think strategically, what things have business risks associated with it, because there's no point in just collecting data that you're never going to use.
Exactly.
Great. So I think that's the last document that we had. Oh, sorry. And then these are all our standard specification documents. Now, sometimes the wireframe will cross-reference to something additional, like spreadsheets that the customer gives us, or screenshot, or branding material, whatever. So this is just a shortcut for us to get to the folder where we store all the extra documents for a specific project in Google Drive, basically.
And I see there's also changes that needs to be done. How does the change history process work?
Sure. So as we're changing these documents, because we have multiple parties to actually work on the specification documents. Now, if you change a Google Doc, multiple people working on the same Google document, then it's easy because people can change it. But I mean, for example, our Xmind and Balsamic, you have to be careful that people don't work on these documents at the same time. Although it's in Google Drive, you still only one person should be making a change to prevent changes from getting lost. So to have an audit trail on our changes, we basically have a document that keeps track. So every time I make a change, or anybody else in my team makes a change to the document, we say what the date is, what page was changed, and exactly what was changed. So we've got this little shorthand format of doing it. So it's very quickly done, but it's it's very important to keep a record of what changed, because let's say I have a meeting once a week with a client and we made changes. So I can quickly go back and tell the client, all right, from the last meeting, we made these changes to the specs. Let me just quickly run you through it so you can see what's happening. So everybody stays on the same page.
And then I see the last thing on our list for today is the roadmap that the business architect does.
Yes, so the roadmap, this is pretty much when we've done all the other specs, and now we're starting to plan our development sprints. So in Agile, you try and develop in small sprints. Now, this is a very flexible document where we can basically say, no, in this sprint, we're going to do these 5 items. In the next sprint, we're going to do these 5 items, in the third sprint, this, and then we'll be finished with the first phase, for example. So this, it really helps. This is sort of the thing the client's most interested in. What is he going to get?
Yeah.
What is he paying for? And it's very short bullet point, on a very high level. If you want to see the fine detail, you can go look in all the other fine detail specification documents. This is just a quick high-level summary, so everybody stays on the same page what they're getting when.
So I guess that's where the journey part comes in, Maarten.
Yes, because this is then where we're going to start talking about how do we actually make this a reality. So you've got the roadmap. I as a business architect and the client is on the same page as to what they want in each small little sprint, but now it needs to get done.
Well, now we know a little bit more about the business architect part, and next week we will be discussing the development and testing part. So that's all from today. From Tech Genius and MF Consulting, we'll see you next time.